How can I make my live drum recording sound more vintage and aged?
No, I think the best way of getting a vintage sound is to do it the vintage way, to use vintage drums, vintage microphones, and vintage microphone techniques. You know, just record it in the same way that they did back then in the olden days. So if you listen to older drum recordings from the 50s, very often these recordings were done by only relatively few microphones, perhaps only 3 microphones on the whole drum kit. Sometimes it may be only 1. Then all these recordings were made to magnetic tape in those days, and it is that what gives you the vintage sound. It's very difficult, I think, to once the sound is recorded in a more modern way, to try and make it sound vintage afterwards. You know, that is much more of a challenge. And then there are like tape saturation plugins out there that simulate as if magnetic tape was used, and that goes some way to making a recording sound more vintage. But I think the best way is to attack the problem at source. Just make sure that your recording is vintage, using vintage techniques and vintage equipment. So I've recorded some drums, mono drums with one singular microphone, and I've only ever found a couple of positions that really worked. One of these positions is near the kick drum, snare drum, and hi-hat, in that sort of area, on the floor, on a small mic stand. Perhaps a foot or two away or so from the kick drum, whereby you have to listen with your own ears before you place the microphone, but an area whereby you hear a good balance of kick, snare, hat, essentially. Yeah. Now that microphone, of course, is going to pick up a lot less of the toms and the cymbals, which are further away, and so therefore it might not be a perfectly balanced sound, but it does give you like a retro sound, especially if you apply a little bit of gentle compression on it. For instance, with a tape simulator. Another great position for a single microphone on the drums is just over the drummer's shoulder, looking towards the snare drum and the kick drum from the drummer's perspective. If you think about it, that method makes a lot of sense to me, because in many ways you can think that when the drummer is playing, the drummer is controlling the sound, and by playing with certain velocities and what have you, but the reference point, of course, is his own hearing or her own hearing. You know, if the sound of the floor tom needs to come up, then this person is going to hit the floor tom a little harder the next time. Yeah, so in a way you can think of the drummer acoustically mixing his drums, and of course the reference point is somewhere around his head, because that's where the ears are. So to have a microphone in that sort of area, of course you don't want to interfere, you don't want to get too close, but that makes a lot of sense to me. In many ways, I think that's a great way, especially if you apply some compression on it, a great way of miking up a whole drum kit in mono and still have a quality, you know, total sound. You know, it's very nice way of doing it. It's great for if you want to make loops. Yeah, like mono drum loop, and it's a great way of doing it. Use just one of those microphones, and then yeah, it's great. It mixes in really well then with the full drum sound later on, but that's another story.